Welcome to Sunday School. Hope you're all doing well. I am back in my basement. Last week I was wrong. And for those who have not heard, we've been last little bit on quarantine with COVID bouncing around our family. We all had the symptoms, but only one of us has been tested, but we pretty much all have had it. So I'm back in my basement for one more Sunday morning, and then hopefully tomorrow I'll be back in the office, and then we'll be back in business as normal. It is the time, so we're doing pretty good, other than some nasally congestion stuff. It's the way it goes. It's a fascinating virus going around. We are blessed that the Lord has taken care of us, and we're thankful for all the prayers. I'm sure that's part of why we didn't get too sick was the many prayers for those who've been praying for us and taking care of us. We've been blessed. So very blessed also to have Rick Spiegel and Chris Peterman filling in the pulpit on Sunday mornings for me. It's been good to watch that. So hopefully as we head in this next week, I'll be back in and hopefully I'll have my breath back. I do get winded a little easier now, but hopefully as I heal up from this, the Lord will provide. But we're back in our Sunday school study. So glad you can join us. Those who are watching live, those who are watching recorded, thank you for joining us. We're studying through the Gospel of Luke, and it's good. It's a great book. It's one of the four Gospels, and so we're working our way through that. And last week we studied a man and woman named Simeon and a woman named Anna who've been waiting to prophesy and meet the Messiah, and they got to meet the baby Jesus at the temple. So it was kind of exciting to read about that. And this week we're going to talk about matured, right? And so we're going to kind of jump into one of the few moments we have of Jesus as an adolescent. We don't have a whole lot, but well, it's fascinating to think about. But there's a lot of false gospels out there that have some time of Jesus's kid years, but they don't make sense to the rest of his ministry. It's fascinating. Plus, they were written hundreds of years after Jesus, and so some of those are fascinating. Some people, I think, when the Da Vinci Code came out, a lot of people got really started engaging in these false gospels again, thinking that they were something new. And they've been around for hundreds of years. They're written a couple hundred years after all the disciples passed away, which is fascinating. They're written hundreds of years after they passed away, yet they still use the names of the disciples as the ones who wrote some of these books. And so it's just funny to read, but we don't really have a whole lot about Jesus' adolescence. My thought is we don't really need it. We only need enough to know when he starts his birth and then the start of his ministry. Mark and the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John both do not have any birth narrative to it. And it's fascinating because each one's drawing a picture of Jesus and a different view of Jesus from their perspective and what they saw. And so not sure why we don't really need his adolescence. It's fascinating to think about. There's a lot of stories and legends about his adolescence, but the Bible is silent on that. So Christians, we've got to be careful filling in the gaps there where the Lord decided not to reveal. It must be, we got to take that as a sign that, he didn't need us to know. We don't need to know. We don't need to know it all. So it's fascinating. But Jesus was a child and a boy. And so we're going to jump into that some more, this is one appearance of Jesus when he was just about an adult. So let's see, we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to way ahead of myself. I get excited. But really we're going to talk about, it's called matured, but really we're talking about being left behind, right? You ever been in a store? You ever, as a parent, one of the most terrifying things is to lose a child somewhere, like they run off and you don't know where they're at. And it's just, it's quite terrifying. And I can only imagine, it happens sometimes. It happens to Mary and Joseph one time. So I can only imagine that. I mean, you've been given the Messiah and then you lose him. So it's quite a terrifying feeling. But we're given a glimpse into the uniqueness of Jesus in his time. And so it really gets to show us that he wasn't just a normal kid. He was fully human, yet fully God. So we're going to talk about that. So a little backstory here, a little bit about the context of Luke. We're in Luke chapter 2 right now, where verse 41 is where I think we're going to pick up. So backstory here, after we see Jesus as an infant with Simeon and Anna, we kind of jump ahead. We don't see a lot about his childhood. We jump to the place where he is 12. Let's see, 12, and so he's at the point of his last bit of childhood, right? So when you're a Jewish child, at the age of 13, you go through what's called your bar mitzvah or your bat mitzvah, which is the symbolic transitioning from a child to an adult. We talk about adolescence. Adolescence has actually been a creation in the 20th century. It's not been that old. At the age of at the end of child labor, when the child labor laws came out back 40s, 50s. I don't exactly remember. Please forgive me. We had these child labor laws, and all these youth who were at one time forced to work now are not allowed to work because of the laws. So we have this this age group from childhood to adulthood who basically had nothing to do because they weren't allowed to work in the factories and stuff, and they weren't quite old enough to, start careers. And so we in America and the world have created this what we call adolescence, which, at one time was just early teenage years, but now it stretches. Some of you guys got kids still live in the basement, so stretches as far as it goes. But that's a fascinating thing because like youth ministry is not that old because we didn't have youth at the time, the youth of adolescence. So really fascinating. Anyway, so I digress. You guys are getting some of my youth ministry training in there. A little extra there. So anyways, I talk about Jesus. Scholars are quite undecided on Jesus' educational level, where he's at. So you remember he grew up in a small town of Nazareth, which is a tiny town just down the hill from Jerusalem. Jerusalem up on a hill. And so we weren't sure exactly what kind of educational elements that Jesus had. They're debate on that. We don't know if there was a synagogue in Nazareth, so he really, going to synagogue school, he wouldn't have been able to do that. Joseph was a poor carpenter. We know that because of the sacrifices he gave. So he couldn't afford the most expensive tutors. We do know that he grew up learning to speak, read, and write in Aramaic, which is a language. Which is the language there. So he learned those things. He spoke Aramaic. We see glimpses of that in the different Gospels because, at the cross, Jesus speaks in Aramaic, and then we have a couple other times that Jesus lets out, the Gospels tell us Jesus' exact words in their Aramaic. And so it's just some fascinating points there that we see the glimpse there that he didn't exactly speak all Greek or all Hebrew. Be it Aramaic was a common language. So, and the nuts that I come to say is that in the society of that time, the prevalent languages of the society, though, were Greek and Koine Greek and Hebrew because of the Jewish influence, and then also the Roman influence of the area. So Greek was the Roman language, Koine Greek was the common man's language. So Jesus probably spoke all three languages. Could read probably Aramaic and some Hebrew because we see him reading from the scrolls at one point. We don't know if he could read Greek or not. But anyways, again, that's kind of filling in the white spaces in the Bible. We got to be careful we don't get lost in those things. Just remember that Jesus was a real boy. And so he learns these things. He's known these things. He has some understanding there. Jesus would have been, as the eldest son of a carpenter, he'd been required to learn his father's trade. So he's probably spent a lot of his time learning woodworking and that sort of thing. We also see, we actually see it permeate through his ministry, because especially in Luke and Mark and different spots, there's talks of there's many aspects to woodworking. The log in the eye, the speck in the eye, log in the eye, building a house on sand. These are all like carpentry type references. Talking about using a cubit, it's a measurement. So we see that his training influence kind of got tied in a little bit, and he's uses what he knows. He got to grow up in that kind of area, so his blue collar education shines through in his teaching also. So we see that too. But the fascinating thing is that as he turns 13, he becomes an adult, and so no longer is a child. He can now be one of the men who sets up a synagogue. There's various things that can be given to the responsibilities are put upon a 13-year-old boy. At that time, we call them boys, but they would have been men in that culture. They had the responsibilities of a man. There's many different things, and so we see that pass pass in there. So this is really, we're going to jump in to really what was Jesus' last Passover meal as a child before he became a man by the cultural standards. So we're in Luke chapter 2, verse 41. If you're still here, you ready? Luke chapter 2, verse 41 says this: Every year his parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. When he was 12 years old, he went up according to the custom of the festival. After those days were over, as they were returning, the boy stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming he was with the traveling party, they went a day's journey. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all of those who heard him were astonished at his understanding and his answer. So we see this picture here of the Passover feast. So every year there was this feast of Passover, which celebrated the last plague of that was upon the Egyptians, which basically where the Jewish people were told to paint blood over their doorpost, had to get real specific rules and stay in their house, and the angel of death came by, and every house that had followed the lamb's blood on the doorpost and the other things that God set up, the angel of death passed over those houses and struck down the Egyptians and those who didn't listen to God. It was kind of the final plague of Egypt, which allowed the Pharaoh then allowed the people of Israel to leave Egypt. So it was kind of a big celebration. It was them being freed from slavery by God's mighty hand. So they have this feast called Passover, which is celebrated throughout the ages of the Israelite people. And so we see here a fascinating part because it says that every year they went up. So Mary and Joseph were not like part-time Christians. Even though they were lower class, hardworking people, they still made it to all the feasts and things. They were there. They were dedicated to their faith. And so we see that kind of as an echo of when we see the beginning when Mary and Joseph were called into a life of raising the Messiah. You know, Joseph was called a righteous man. Mary was called a woman of favor. We see these things, and we see it plays out in their lives. They didn't just say it, but they believed it. They made sure they came to the festivals. They made sure they were doing what they're supposed to do, the sacrifices. They follow everything that we see. And so we see this beautiful picture of Mary and Joseph raising Jesus in the Jewish way. And so they're following law. They're following what they're commanded. They're following God with all their heart. And so we see that beautiful picture there. And we kind of get that picture in here, but what happens is that the Passover is a 7-day feast called part of it was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where they came and actually came up to Jerusalem. So you got to remember that too. Jerusalem's up on a hill, Nazareth is down at the bottom down, and so they had to walk actually up. Quite a journey. We see that, and they came up there for the week. We see this point that Jesus was 12 years old when his parents took him to observe the Passover. It's not his first time. They've been there many times, like they always did. But here's the thing, this is the final year he would observe it as a child. At the age of 13, he'd become a full son of the covenant, as they would say. So that's the bar mitzvah. He had reached adulthood in the eyes of the Jews. He would then be able to read the Torah for himself and would constitute one of the 10 men required to establish a synagogue. The later writings of the Mishnah declared that the last Passover before 13 years of age was a special time for the child prepared for his becoming an adult. As the event unfolded, Jews would prove more. So we see this picture here. The Mishnah, which is the writing of the Jewish people, kind of referenced this magic age of the final Passover as a final Passover as a child. And it's kind of a special kind of saying goodbye to your childhood type thing. It's kind of that special moment of transitioning to adulthood here. And that's one of the sad parts in our American cultures. We miss that transitioning period there. We don't have a mark says, all right, you are now an adult. It used to be, 16 year license or 18 when you become a legal adult, but our culture doesn't embrace people as adults anymore. We don't have a set standard in which we do, and it varies by cultural area and, good or bad. I think it's really something we miss. especially in the church, we should really have some type of like moment of, hey, you're an adult now, take over these responsibilities. But anyways, I'll digress on that one. That's one of my pet peeves. But we'll get into that hopefully someday soon. So where are we at? Unwind. Back to it. All right, verse 43. After the days of the Passover, unleavened bread, and everything, we see that they left Jesus. They left for Nazareth. All right, and so basically they would be traveling in a big party because it was dangerous to travel alone. We see references to that in like the Good Samaritan and some other things that when you travel these roads, they're treacherous because people, there wasn't like the old west where they had the marshal riding around on a horse protecting people. This is kind of a wild time, and so they didn't always guard all the paths and everything, and thieves and robbers would set out into the byways and highways and wait for people to come alone and then attack them and take their money and things. And so they would travel in family groups. They travel in big groups to stay together, to protect each other and help each other. And so it's not uncommon for this huge family to be family group moving together there, friends. And so, it's not like car seats and that sort of thing. So, of course, they would spread out. I'm sure Jesus traveled with kids his own age, and they kind of all traveled together with relatives and things like that. We see Mary and Joseph. They had other children at this time, I'm sure. Jesus is 12. I'm pretty sure they had more kids. We know that they do have kids because it references them later on. Some of our Catholic friends don't believe that. We, though, do see it. They talk about Jesus' brothers and sisters when they come to approach him about, they think he's going crazy. At one point, they're like, hey, Jesus, come home. His mom and his brothers. But he tells them, who's my mother and brother? And so we see references to that. We see several of those things. So anyways, so we get back on track here. This idea that Jesus has been left behind, but he's kind of stayed behind. And so they don't notice now they're being irresponsible here. Jesus would have been expected to have followed his family, was his human family. So it would have been just expected of him to do the thing, the cultural thing here, and follow the family as they go. That's going to come into play here in a minute. And so he would have been with like a relative group. The parents would just have thought that. Now they're being neglectful, but that's just the way it was. You travel with your group, you were respectful of that sort of thing. You watch out for each other. So that's what they thought. So 3 days would have been, some people want to guess that it was 1 day travel, 1 day travel back, 1 day searching for him. We don't know if that was it, or they came back and looked around for 3 days. Either way, 3 to 5 days. Jesus is like living the homeless life in the temple, I guess. We don't really know. It was fascinating there. So we see that, and then Mary and Joseph finally go back to the temple, I guess, and they find Jesus there. Which is fascinating. For the one thing is that he was hiding out there. The second thing is this, that he was sitting among the teachers, right, and the scholars. These are the people who would the men who would sit around and debate the finer parts of the law. They would come and discuss. This wasn't like the kids area. They weren't like the kids' Sunday school area. This was like the adult scholar people who were out sitting, teaching, and debating amongst themselves what the law meant and what the law taught. So we see this. So we find a couple of things here. First, Jesus was listening, right? He was listening to what they were saying. And so that's an important thing we need to get a hold of, that Jesus learns and he grows as he's growing into his humanness, all right? So he is born fully human, fully God. Some people debate what that means, if he knew every single thing right off the birth, or if he learned things as he went and God revealed things. Some people argue that at his baptism he learned everything. Some people argue that at his the moment of transfiguration on the mount where he's transfigured and sees Moses and Elijah, that he all of a sudden learns everything there. We don't know. We don't know how much he had to learn. We don't know how much there is, but we do have this reference that he was listening and learning. And it's an important thing for us because we remember Jesus was fully human. And so at what degree did he have to learn and what degree did he know? We don't know, but we know there was a process there of learning and studying and growing in wisdom, which we'll hear more about that in a minute. We see he was listening to these scholars teaching, and he was also asking them questions, right? He was asking them questions about the law and about what they were doing probably and why they would do it. It's a fascinating thing because he really just prodded them, and he's really picking at them a little bit, I would think, because they were amazed. They were amazed by his questions, by his everything. It's fascinating that as a child he was able to question them and talk to them like that. But I guess they were very open. This little kid who got left in the temple. We don't really know that, but we do have this understanding that they were all amazed by his understanding. So he was asking questions, listening, and he was had a deeper level at 12 years old. So he's fascinating. It's fascinating there to see he was a little bit different though. Though he's learning and understanding, he was different than the other kids, and that kind of plays into the essence of his fully God, fully man understanding. So we see that beautiful picture there that he was there in the temple and this stuff was happening, and people were like, "Whoa, there's something different about this kid," especially because they saw he was probably a poor carpenter's son, and so they understood these sort of things. It's like, wow, how does he know this? He would not have been to a rabbinical school. He probably didn't have a rabbi master that he followed around. So they're amazed by these sort of things. All right. So move on. We're going to be in verse 48 now. We're jumping into verse 48. If you're still with me, throat's a little dry, but I'm getting it. All right. I'm going to take a quick drink. Pardon the drink in the middle of the talk. We were blaming it on COVID or something. I don't know. I still got a little rasp to my voice, but hopefully the Lord will continue to heal this week. And next Sunday, when I get in the pulpit, we'll be able to bring the message. So verse 48, chapter 2, verse 48. Here we go. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. Why were you searching for me?" He asked them. "Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Okay, so we have one of these moments that probably made each one of us old, well, especially those who are a little bit older. That moment when your parents find you and they're upset, that's a scary moment. Judgment's coming, right? Been there. So I remember wandering off one time as a kid. Me and my friend were out playing in the woods. I knew where I was at. I was having fun. Did not keep track of time. And my parents thought me and my buddy were lost in the woods. And, we come trancing back like, we ain't lost. We just having fun. And, Mom didn't think that was so funny. Yeah, I got in trouble for that one. Yeah, anyway, so it was fun though. But Mom was devastated when I came back. It's like, ooh, this is not going to happen well. So, but it all turned out because I'm still here. Survived that one. But anyway, so I can only imagine how frantic Mary and Joseph were being at spots. But we see here that they were astonished to see him there. They were kind of confused. So remember back in a moment ago, we were talking about Jesus was supposed to be culturally going with his family group back to Nazareth. So that was what the intention was. They had thought he was going to do what he's supposed to do and go with his family group. And so we see here that they come and they're amazed to find him in the temple. They're amazed to find him where he's at. And they really question, why are you treating us like this? Why would you do this to us? So we know that there was a moment of decision here. We have a moment that this wasn't just I was goofing off and I got left behind. It was, he made a choice to be there. And so we see that. And so, we see this moment here. No, Jesus was not disobeying his parents. We see that this fascinating part here. So we see this, that they're actually anxiously searching for him. Mary's worked up. I mean, can you imagine that? You lose the Messiah. I always wonder about that one. I was a chosen mother, and I lost him, God. So I can only imagine that. But anyways, Mary indicates in Acts that she'd been anxiously searching for him. She usually it says here that she uses usually a strong word for search. So they're like frantically tormented and suffering as they're looking for him, which is fascinating there. That you'd think that they would go to the temple first to pray and ask for help on that, for at least after a day, be like, oh, we need to go seek God in this. But they miss all that. And we see this again that it's just that anguish there, the physical and the pain that Mary goes through with Jesus. So we see that too, that Mary is a favored one. She accepts being the mother of Jesus, but she's also tormented several times. She takes things to heart several times. We see that, and we see these other times that she is struck through the heart when things happen to Jesus. So there's a lot of emotionalness there that is tied to Mary and Jesus. And so we see this idea that throughout the gospel. And so it's fascinating there. Here's another point of that she's anxiously tormented by being separated from him. So Jesus responds. He responds, why are you searching for me? So not the normal action. Well, no. It depends. Depends on, I would say not the normal response for a 12-year-old, but I met some pretty rude 12-year-olds. And so especially working in the church, you'd be surprised how many disrespectful kids are that age. And so, but Jesus is not being disrespectful here. He was questioning them in reality. Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know? Basically, almost like, why is this the last place you looked? You know who I am. The angel told you I'm the Messiah. Basically, I was busy about something, and so we see that here. He's almost rebuking them a little bit. For first, the fact that it could be because it took him 3 days to come to the temple. It could have been that that he was following a different path. Like, remember, we talked about that. He was culturally supposed to have gone with the family, the earthly family, but instead he went to God, to the temple, which was a spiritual family. And so we see that deviance there from his following his earthly family to following his spiritual family there. And so and I think it ties in with him being, going through his final Passover as a child. And so there's a lot of tie-in there. And we see that, didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? We start seeing he's understanding a little bit here. So did he know he was fully God? No. Why don't we don't know. How much do we know was revealed to him? We do know that he knew his true spiritual father was God. And that's quite a big thing to tie in for a 12-year-old. But we understand that here. So we have this revelation there revealing that he knew where he's at, and he was surprised that they didn't know where he's at. And so that's the other thing. Sometimes we, as followers of Christ, we are so focused on doing things the way we always do things that we lose track of changes and the direction God's taking us and things. And so we always got to be following him and trying to figure out what he is doing. So we do see that they didn't understand. They're like, they didn't understand what he said to them. They're like, what? It's right over their head. Of course, they're just, post panic, finding their child. But we see that here, that it went over their head that he was the Messiah, that he was, God was his spiritual father, is what he tied on to, and that's where he would be. And so we see that as he heads into adulthood. See is here that one thing to remember these things is Jesus had apparently lived a normal life as a child without stories such as this one leading to amazement and wonder. So we don't know a lot about his childhood. Again, like I said earlier, the quarterly kind of points it out here. We this is one of the few stories we have. We do know when he gets quite a bit older, 20s, 30s, Mary wants him to turn water into wine. So maybe by that time she's grasped a hold of his specialness. But, as a child, we don't have a lot of those recording things. And so I think, part of me thinks that if we had those things, we'd get distracted by them. Because we've got to remember that the Gospels were written for a purpose. The recording of his life was written in a certain way, not for us to be entertained or not for us just to sit around and enjoy or read around Christmas time. But they're there to help us grow to know Jesus and know how to live out a life that glorifies God. And I think that's the important part we got to remember. The gospel is the good news. That's why it's the gospel, the good news of Luke. The gospel of Luke is the good news of Luke, which is that Jesus came, lived a perfect life, died on the cross for our sins, and was raised again 3 days later to give us new life. And so that's kind of an important thing that we need to get a hold of. And sometimes we want, especially as Americans, Westerners, our scientific view on everything, systematic view. We need to, we want to see the whole picture. We want to see A plus B plus C plus D. We see the process, all that sort of thing. And that was not the mindset of the first century Jewish writer. They were more telling the story, telling and having a purpose behind it. And so there's fascinating things there. Anyways, I digress. We need to get back to our study here, but it's fascinating little bits in there. Excuse me. So we see that in here. We see that thought that, Jesus knew he was something special. Mary Joseph did not quite get it. They knew something special, but didn't quite get it. So we move in then to verse 51 here. Verse 51 of chapter 2 says this: Then he went down with them, came to Nazareth, and was obedient to them. His mother kept all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with people. All right, so we see his life. So, first thing he says, went down. Again, we got to remember Jerusalem was up on a hill, and they physically had to go down the hill to Nazareth. Went down there, down into Galilee. And so, they went there, and he was obedient. He followed his parents. He was obedient to them. He did what he was supposed to do. Again, he's 12, going to an adult. We don't hear anything from him really until he's 30, right? Around 30. And so that's 18 years. What will happen there? We don't know. There's a lot of things here we don't know. This is the last reference that we have of Joseph. Does Joseph die? Does Joseph, something happen to him? Is he there and we just don't hear it recorded? We don't know. There's no record of it because remember, Joseph was a first century poor Jewish carpenter, and people really didn't care to record it. Some people ask, why do we have more information about the Bible, more information about Jesus and stuff? I think you guys people forget sometimes that Jesus was born into a poor carpenter's family, and the only reason we have what we do is because of the miraculous life he started living after he was 30. When he started his public ministry, he started changing lives, and then he revealed himself as the Messiah. Before that, people really didn't care because he was just a poor kid in a poor area. And so we got to remember those things. And so we have some things because, of course, the disciples talked to Mary, and Mary's prominent through the Gospels, especially Jesus' ministry. See her popping in and out. And so a lot of them talked to them, took care of her. We see that on the cross. He told basically one of the disciples, look, this is your new mom. You can take care of her. It's your new son. So it's fascinating there because Mary, as she progresses through the Gospels, becomes less of a mother and more of a follower of Jesus. And so, but anyways, we can discuss that some other time, but get back on track here. So again, Joseph is the last reference to him in the Gospels. His mother, we talk about this, she keeps it in her heart. This is another one of those times that she remembers. So we see that in Luke a couple of times, right? The shepherds come and she writes it in her heart. It's special to her. That's special because how do you think they heard about this? Well, my feeling is that Mary told these things to Luke, revealed these times to him when he's recording this history, because Luke's more the historian type. That's what he says at the beginning. He was put everything in the right order, so he probably went to Mary and talked to her about these things, and she has these special memories of, the time these shepherds showed up after the baby was born, or the time that Jesus got lost and we left him, had to come back. It was very traumatic for her, but she remembers these things. So we see it was a special moment for her, and special moment. Some things to also remember is that in that time it was a story-based culture where there was written things, but everything was real expensive. Like, you didn't have a copy of the Bible because that would cost like a year's wages to pay for, even like one of the letters or something, one of the scrolls. And so to pass on information and stories and family heritage and stuff like that, you would tell story-based things. And so, we, as a technology age, we feel we're superior in so many ways, but we're not. We just have different tools than they have. And the more you study ancient culture, the more you realize these people, they were on it. What they were able to do with what they had. And the way they were able to remember several things, they would memorize, they could understand and tell back because that was the way you were trained. And the more, especially at a young age, the more you learn to memorize things, the more you're able to memorize things later on. It was always funny to watch those people who went through school before the 90s, I think 90s, 80s, 90s, because they can do math in their head very quickly. Those who got into the 80s and 90s, they started bringing in calculators into the classrooms, and you can see those people can kind of do math in their head kind of quick, not as quickly, but kind of do it there. And then now in the year 2000, if a kid doesn't have some of them are like struggling, like, wow, how do you do that? How do you make change in your mind like that without writing it out? So fascinating there. So we see that these people had a lot of practice at remembering, memorizing, and telling, where we as modern Christians, modern people, we don't even remember phone numbers anymore. Most people I ask what their phone number is, they're like, I don't know what it is. Which is when I was a kid, I had like 20 numbers memorized in my head. I still remember my phone number growing up. So anyways, all that to say is that, if you practice memorizing, you can remember those things. So the people of that time, that's all they had was memorizing and telling. And so they would have remembered these things. They would have had a better memory than we do, as modern people, because we have neglected those exercises to keep our minds sharp and remember those things. So Mary would remember these things. She would pass them on to Luke, and even talk to Matthew about these things, these disciples. Because remember, all these people were alive together at the same time. The Gospels weren't written hundreds of years after Jesus died. They were written shortly after his death, within the next several, 10, 20 years. So all these witnesses and people were there who could verify these things. The stories that were written, people would have lived them, would have still been alive. We got to remember that these original Gospels and everything was written when the people who were in them were still alive. And so, we think about that sometimes. Oh, they're written way later, and the disciples changed a bunch of stuff. No, because the people who would have been like, I remember that, and that didn't happen. They would have been called out on it, and they would have been, called heretics. It's that sort of thing. So we got to remember that. But anyways, back. I don't know what I'm saying now. Back on the idea that this meant something to Mary, so she filed it away in her heart, to remember that this moment in which Jesus pointed out that he was busy by his Father's business, being in the temple, growing, and that's where he needed to be, in with his spiritual family, not his physical family. And so we see that there. And we see Mary remembering this, and so she makes this reference that, all right, then Jesus, after this, he just grew. He was obedient, right? He was obedient to them, and I don't know if he was before or not. I'm guessing he was, but we don't know. But we know at this moment forward, she says, look, he was obedient. He went back with them. He followed in what he's supposed to do. He grew in stature. He grew in, physically. He grew mentally. He grew in wisdom. And, he grew quite a bit. And so we see that here, this increasing growth of Jesus, the developing of him, and it should be encouragement to each one of us that as we study the Bible, as we grow and as we become older, that we need to be growing and increasing in wisdom and that sort of thing, in stature with men, with other people. Our reputation should be growing as Christians, as godly people who seek to honor God in their lives and seek to make things right in their lives to glorify God. That should be the center aspect of what we do and who we are. And that way we become that light. As Jesus was the light, we are then the light too to this world. We're a city on a hill. And we see that a part of our life. We need to be growing, not just listening to messages and going to Sunday school, but taking these things into our heart and letting them change us, who we are, and how we live. As Jesus was changed and grew in his life, we need to do the same thing. So that's the challenge of this lesson here, is really that we need to be growing in our wisdom, growing and following God. Just as Jesus came and he grew and increased in wisdom, we need to do the same thing. And he grew and obeyed God, and he was known as a godly kid. He was doing something special. All right. So that's something to think about, to challenge us as we grow and as we go, that if you're just floating through the Christian life, it's time to stop and make an effort to grow, make an effort to increase in wisdom to honor God in our lives and understand what He's calling us to. And I'm not saying like crazy stuff, but start studying your Bible, read the Gospels for yourself, read the letters for yourself, start telling people about what you've read. Let God change you from the inside out and grow you as a follower of Him. All right, that's kind of the challenge for each one of us. All right. So thank you again for joining us. Next week, we're going to jump in. I'll be in my office next week. I'm excited for that, unless there's like a crazy snowstorm or something. But I could probably even walk from there. Anyways, but next week, we're going to jump into Luke chapter 3. So we're going to jump ahead. So jump in there. It's going to be exciting. It'll be good to be together again. So let me pray as I close this today. Excuse me. I'm excited because Chris Peterman's going to be preaching today, and I haven't heard him speak yet. And so I'm excited to see that. I'll be online watching that. So hopefully you can all make it in there at 10:15 too. All right. So let's pray, and we'll go and be dismissed for today. Father God, just thank you for this time we could spend together studying your word and studying your ways, Lord. Help us to grow in you and to be changed by you, Lord, in all that we do, that we glorify you, and help us to grow in your wisdom, Lord. Help us to make an effort to follow Jesus' ways and be obedient and follow you, Lord. We ask this all in your holy and precious name, and amen. All right, God bless and have a wonderful day.